Hi again, everybody, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder. And today we are going to talk about the 1950s in America and post-war prosperity for those that were able to take advantage of it in the 1950s. So you can see many Americans were fearful in the 1950s that the end of the war would bring renewed economic depression, since that is what they had known before the war. Economists even thought this was going to happen. Professionals did. The American economy isn't going to produce enough jobs for all of the people who have the jobs and all of the people coming back from the war. But instead of a depression, America enters its longest period of economic growth in American history, and a lot of people become a part of the middle class at this time. And this fosters a widespread sense of optimism about the nation's future. So coming home from war is called demobilization. If we had to mobilize for the war and transition to a wartime economy, then demobilization would be transitioning to a peacetime economy and bringing home members of the military. We thought that a large influx of these young men coming home into the labor supply would mean smaller wages and greater unemployment, but these fears never came true, and the 1950s were full of economic prosperity for most. First off, we need to set these gentlemen who risk their lives up for coming home. So Congress passes the GI Bill of Rights, which gives them 1 year of unemployment pay, financial aid to get an education from college, and government loans for housing. And the time was right for a lot of young couples since the war was over and since the Depression was over to begin having families. And so the period from 1945 to 1960 or so is known as the baby boom. And the baby boom just means that this is the largest generation in our nation's history up until that point. A lot of people are having babies. In 1957, one baby was born every 7 seconds. And so from 1940 to 1955, the U.S. population experienced its greatest increase in history, going from 130 million to 165 million in just 15 years. Transitioning to a peacetime economy, inflation is a problem that we need to deal with, because during the war, rationing and price controls keeps a lid on inflation, which is the rising of prices. But after the war, there's nothing to hold the free market down anymore, so prices skyrocket. And a healthy level of inflation is good for the economy. You like to keep it around 3%. But in 1946, just to compare, prices rise 18% after the war. So the end of wartime goods restrictions opens the floodgates on consumerism, which we'll talk about next time. There's just too many goods to buy. There's too much money to buy too few goods. Too much money to buy too few goods. And also during the 1950s, we can start making more stuff because productivity increases, and this usually happens after a war. The war forces people to make stuff better, and so we can then reap the benefits of that after the war. New computers being used, atomic energy to create power, and new farming techniques are examples of technology in the 1950s that made stuff better. It also puts us into the upward swing of the business cycle for quite a long time, so that's good. And just to compare, we produce half of the world's stuff, but we are only 6% of the world's population in the 1950s. Government spending in the Korean War also led to new materials and plastics and technologies to make stuff, and the Marshall Plan initiates this demand for American goods overseas. Now, in the United States, we have another major population shift that starts in the 1940s and continues through the end of the century, and that is the shift of population to the Sun Belt. And the Sun Belt is the southern and western states highlighted in red here. Los Angeles, Dallas, and Houston, Texas, and Los Angeles, California become huge during this time period. Symbolically, in 1958, both the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants baseball team moved to Los Angeles and San Francisco, respectively. Causes for this, the warm climates, the growing aerospace and electronics industries take hold in the South and the West. The development of home air conditioning, which was only used for public buildings because they were such large units, now it can fit into the window of your home and thus creating cold air inside your home in a hot climate. And immigrants are also raising the population when they are coming from Cuba into Florida and coming into the Southwest from Mexico. And the effects of this are a lot of political power shifts to the South and the West. Presidents from the 1950s all the way through Obama are from the South and the West. Obama being from Illinois kind of bucks that pattern. The environmental problems, though, are outrageous with the amount of smog that is, smoke and fog combined in Los Angeles and other areas. Traffic jams because the roads aren't big enough and they're not a big enough system to handle all of the cars that will put on them. And we do have a desert in the southwest of our nation, and so water shortages. There's not enough water for a lot of the people out there. The economy also shifts its focus from manufacturing to service, and we become a service economy. So instead of making stuff, we now, over 50% of our economy is centered on providing a service like healthcare, retail, law, banking, insurance, teaching. I provide a service. We provide a service rather than making stuff. And one of the big new industries are the information industries, where they start working with information, electronics, and computers. And these computers begin to take the jobs of people. ENIAC is the first computer in America, the first official computer. There were prototypes before this and things in World War II, but it takes up over 18,000 square feet, and it is less powerful than today's cell phones. But computers begin to replace the jobs of people by hotels using them for reservations and banks using them for accounting, just to name a few. Franchises start to take hold in the 1950s. It's just a different way of providing a service or a business. The main company distributes products and services through outlets that are owned by independent owners. So the Fort Wayne McDonald's are owned by one person, so to speak. It might be a couple of people, but one person can own multiple businesses in a region. Ray Kroc is the businessman who finds the McDonald's brothers restaurant in California and copies their model of efficient restaurants, without plates, without tipping, without servers. That is how they create the giant that McDonald's is today. Walmart is a discount merchandising business founded by Sam Walton. Estee Lauder is a woman who focuses on selling her cosmetics in high-end department stores to make people want them. And so these people represent entrepreneurs who start franchises. Entrepreneurs are people who risk personal assets for the ownership and operation of a business. Corporations in America begin to go multinational, which means they establish branches overseas and around the world. Examples of that are General Motors, General Electric, IBM, or International Business Machines, and Coca-Cola becomes the most recognized brand around the world. And all of this business has an effect on labor. The two major unions in the United States, the AFL and the CIO, merge to become the AFL and the CIO. They hold lots of political clout. People want their approval, and so they make policies favorable to labor. And trade unions, because of this, lose momentum. White-collar workers in the new service industry do not join unions, and the scandal with the Teamsters union, they have a misuse of funds that tarnishes their image. So after the war, Truman has to basically, he's led us through the war, but now he has to lead us at home as well, domestically. So we've spent a lot of time covering the foreign policy. Now let's focus on Truman's domestic policy. There's a lot of inflation without wage increases because prices are rising faster than wages can, which means your money doesn't buy as much. So there are a lot of steel, coal, railroad, and auto worker strikes immediately after the war. So Congress retaliates by passing the Taft-Hartley Act, just named after two congressmen who sponsored the bill, which outlaws places that only hire union workers. So there used to be laws that said if you want to work here, you have to be the member of a union because the union negotiates. That is now illegal. And so this negates some rights that the unions had gained in the New Deal era. And a lot of people don't like it. Truman at this point also integrates the military because he sees blacks and whites coming home from overseas and the whites are treated as heroes and the blacks aren't. So he thinks that's ridiculous and he integrates the military, which means that by 1951, most military units have blacks and whites in them. Truman upsets Thomas Dewey in the presidential election of 1948. Dewey was expected to win easily. Newspapers even went to press saying that Dewey had won, but there's a famous photo of Truman holding up a Dewey defeats Truman newspaper, and he is actually the one who won. Truman also proposes a fair deal during his his first official term. He took over when Roosevelt died, but his first official term is from 49 to 53. And his domestic program is called the Fair Deal. He wanted to strengthen the already existing New Deal programs and establish new ones, but he loses popularity fairly quickly, and he fails to win congressional approval of these reforms. And lastly, in 1952, because of Korea and China becoming communist, and that being Truman's fault, according to some people, Eisenhower easily becomes president in 1952. He doesn't run against Truman. Truman doesn't run again. He can't run again. The future president, Richard Nixon, is his vice president. You can see here on the Time magazine cover. Technically, the Democrats and the Republicans both wanted Eisenhower as their nominee, but they like him because he's a middle-of-the-road president. He achieves a balance between liberal and conservative beliefs and ideals. Some things that he did that we'll talk more about as we go on. He introduces an interstate highway system, and he gives federal money to education. He does not repeal the New Deal programs like Social Security, even though he agrees that the federal government had grown too strong during that time. So still, again, satisfying both Democrat and Republican needs. That's as far as we're going to go today into the 1950s. We'll come back and talk more about consumerism. Fill out your learning targets, and I'll see you back in class. Bye-bye.